Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this panel discussion on construction and sustainability. I'm Delphine Adenau-Ousu, the Executive Director of the EU Chamber of Commerce in Canada. Supported by the EU delegation, the EU Chamber of Commerce in Canada, or UCAN, acts as a business voice of the EU in Canada. We advocate for EU companies at all levels of governments. We address common affairs and we voice business interests and recommendations to the EU and the Canadian governments. The EU and Canada are closer than ever and enjoy close-knit relationship, both on the political side, but also on the bilateral trade and investment. Sustainability has become key on both sides of the Atlantic, not because it's a trend, but because we no longer have choice. As the pressure on resources increase, mentalities and habits have to change. To avoid severe consequences of global warming, there's a strong need to limit the warming to 2 degrees or even 1.5 degrees. The Paris Agreement addressed the climate change accepted by 195 countries. It sets a new direction and a new scale for global climate action. COP26 is starting in a few days, and we do hope to see our leaders taking concrete action to accelerate the fight against global warming. But as legal frameworks are just the starting point, businesses and communities have to take action to move to a zero carbon economy. The UN is pretty clear, time is running out. And I quote, to have a chance of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, we have 8 years to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by almost half. Today, our speakers will talk about sustainability in the construction sector and how Canada and the EU can work better together. Just some housekeeping rules before we start the event. So this is in a webinar mode. So to all the participants, you have access to the chat. Feel free to network and use the chat also to engage with each other. And if you have any questions or comments, we will try to take them along with the conversation and have maybe a Q&A section at the end of the event. But please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Before she introduces our speaker of the day, I would like to introduce our moderator, Caroline Brown, president of Delphi Group, a pioneer in sustainability consulting. They help organizations to become more transparent, accountable, and prosperous in this ever-challenging landscape. Thank you very much, Caroline, for accepting to moderate this important discussion. Thank you, obviously, to our speaker and our participants today. And I wish you all a fruitful event and discussion. Thank you very much. Over to you, Caroline.
Merci, and thank you, Delphine. I have the pleasure of moderating this great session today, and I'm going to introduce the speakers in just a couple of minutes. First, I'm going to begin with acknowledging that I'm joining you today from Canada, from the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. These include the Blackfoot First Nation tribes of Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Stoney Nakoda First Nation tribes of Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation. The city of Calgary is also the homeland to our historic Northwest Métis and the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. For our international friends, I just want to share that we do this act of acknowledging the land as an act of reconciliation with Indigenous people in Canada and an expression of gratitude and respect for the land. So if you feel comfortable and you want to share in the chat where you are coming from today, no matter if it's in Canada or not, please do so. And all languages are welcome. So to reiterate what Delphine said, we can use the chat to interact, to make comments. If you have specific questions for the speakers, please put them in the Q&A, which I will be monitoring, and we will try to get to all of your questions today. All right, the exciting part. I'm going to now bring up our speakers to introduce themselves and their companies. And I'm going to start with Adrian Thomas, who is the country president for Schneider Electric. Adrian, over to you.
Good morning, Carol. Thank you. And I appreciate the acknowledgement of the land, even though we're doing this on a virtual platform. So thank you for that. So Adrian Thomas, I'm the country president for Schneider Electric Canada. Schneider Electric brings energy management and automation solutions to customers to help bridge the gap between progress and sustainability. So we've been in business for over 100 years and have migrated from a steel manufacturer all the way up to a technology and sustainability company. So certainly we are very much engaged in delivering technology and solutions to customers to help them do more with less. So thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Adrian. And next is Oliver Lange, the CEO of Intelligent City.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Caroline and Delphine. It's fantastic to be here on this amazing panel. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Intelligent City, and I'm a German-Canadian and originally from Hamburg, Germany, actually, and now been in Canada, in Vancouver for the last 22 years. And I'd like to share, as an introduction about what we do and who we are, a quick little video. I hope you can see this.
Yes, we can, Oliver. Great.
Okay, great. So Intelligent City is a housing technology company that takes a product and platform-based approach, offering quality housing and workspace solutions that are faster to build, more affordable, and consistently carbon neutral. We're addressing climate change and housing affordability in a highly fragmented industry that is lacking innovation and still builds bespoke buildings in non-scalable ways. Our technology seamlessly integrates proprietary parametric software, robotics, and mass timber building systems to offer a one-stop solution to developers, housing operators, and collaborative construction teams. We have completed extensive testing to meet latest building codes for high-rise timber construction in Canada and the US, and Passive House low energy performance certification standards. We're first in the world to manufacture mass timber integrated building systems for the building superstructure and large-scale envelope panels using advanced robotics in our next generation factory here in Delta, BC. Our in-house parametric software, together with integrated manufacturing automation, enables adaptability and scalability to serve broad customer needs in multiple markets for the same building systems and platforms and manufacturing line, addressing a problem that has been difficult to deal with for the prefab industry for a long time. We enable carbon neutrality through integrated design, carbon positive construction using mass timber across all levels or uses of the buildings, dramatically reducing operational energy and positively affecting reduction of car dependency through desirable quality urban housing. We offer a one-stop building solutions that are resilient and consistently meet ESG mandates today. We work with a network of strategic partners and developers across North America and Europe. Simply put, we are empowering people to live better in the industry to build smarter and more future-proof. And this project that you see on the screen is one of the first prefabricated high-rise mass timber passive houses that we're starting construction for next year in downtown Vancouver. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oliver. I've always wondered what mass timber means, and now I have a good visual for it. All right, and so now we're going to move to Richard Joggery from the company SaintGobain. He's the CEO in Canada. Richard, it's up for you now.
Hi everyone, my name is Richard Joggery. I'm the CEO for SaintGobain and CertainTeed in Canada. I am coming to you from Mississauga, Ontario, and before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which I'm standing today is part of the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Credit Nations. SaintGobain designs, manufactures, and distributes materials and solutions for the construction, the mobility, the healthcare, and other application industrial application markets. We develop those products and solutions through a continuous innovation process, and they can be found everywhere in our living places, in our daily life. And we try to provide well-being, performance, safety, while addressing the challenges of sustainable construction, resource efficiency, and the fight against climate change. The strategy of responsible growth is guided by the SaintGobain purpose, you can see in my background, making the world a better home, which responds to the shared ambitions of all women and men in the group to act every day to make the world a more beautiful and sustainable place to live in. As a consequence of that commitment, we are committed to achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. We are a major company, roughly 60 billion Canadian dollar turnover in 2020, operating in 70 countries around the world. When it comes to Canada, we operate in Canada along these principles, coast to coast, through 13 manufacturing sites, specializing into building materials. We provide our Canadian stakeholders a number of light and sustainable building solutions under the brand CertainTeed for the exterior envelope of the building, as well as all of the internal partitioning and finishing. We are extremely proud to act Canadian in the global footprint of SaintGobain, and more than 70% of our solutions we sell in Canada are made in Canada. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. Tom Skelly is from Kingspan, and he's the operations manager in Canada. And over to you, Tom, to introduce a bit more about yourself and the company.
Good morning, everyone. As it said, I'm Tom Skelly. I'm operations manager with Kingspan here in Canada. We have multiple operations in Canada and throughout the world. For those of you that don't know Kingspan Group, we're a world leader in the building envelope solution, including high performance insulated panels, insulation, raised access floors, lighting, ventilation, and a whole host of integrated renewable technologies. I suppose with the emphasis on sustainability, we've updated our vision to be a global leader in sustainable businesses and establish a leading position in providing ethical, renewable, and affordable best practice solutions for the construction sector. And I suppose what that means for us today is, or where I'll be coming from in a little bit, is in respect to what we call our Planet Passionate program. And that's a commitment that Kingspan has made across 4 different targets to be achieved over the next 10 years. So from an energy point of view, we need to maintain a net zero energy status that we achieved in 2020. We have the ambition that 60% of our direct renewable energy will be in place by 2030, 20% on-site renewable energy across all of our wholly owned plants by 2030. We aim for net zero carbon manufacturing also by 2030, and a 50% reduction in product CO2 intensity from our primary supply chain partners. With an industry like steel and chemicals, that's a particularly challenging one. In terms of circularity, we aim to upcycle 1 billion PET bottles into our manufacturing processes in the next 3 years. And all of our manufacturing facilities will be zero waste to landfill by 2030. Additionally, with water being such a high priority globally now, and especially for those of us in North America, we've seen the forest fires on the West Coast and the threat of drought. We'll aim that 1 million litres of rainwater will be harvested in each of our facilities by 100 million, excuse me, by 2030 also.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thanks, Tom. You are all practitioners, obviously, of sustainable construction. And so this is going to be a fruitful conversation. I'm going to continue to encourage our participants to engage in the chat. Thank you for those who have. So as Delphine said, as governments and consumer expectations rise for sustainable construction, how can European and Canadian industries join forces to meet the new challenges? So I'm going to start us with a question around, given your experiences globally, all of you, especially in Europe and Canada, what's similar? What's different in terms of sustainable construction? What are your thoughts on this? And I invite you to, one by one, put up your hand and weigh in, please.
Well, if I go first, I worked in manufacturing for Kingspan in both Europe and Canada. And the most striking difference that I noticed when I came to Canada was just the questions that our sales guys are asking us. In Canada, it was very much around aesthetics, but I was used to coming from Europe, whereby it was a lot more about performance. It was obvious that the building had certain performance targets or goals that they wanted to achieve. And I saw much less questioning from the people out selling our product in Canada than I would have seen in Europe. So straight away, without knowing a lot about the Canadian construction sector when I got here, that was a striking difference.
Okay, we like things beautiful, but hopefully we're starting to change that. Charles, do you have any comments around the things that you're seeing?
Well, the things I'm seeing, I'm probably seeing a major difference between Canada and the old Europe in the way you split the market between renovation and new, and that's something that's really different. When we consider the potential for our products in a country like France, generally speaking, it's 60–70% renovation. In Canada, it's exactly the opposite. So we can probably learn from those two countries, one another, learning from what's mainstream on the other side of the Atlantic. That's a big opportunity. What we see also as differences, and that's something that's really helping potentially to reach those targets faster than in terms of carbon neutrality, is the tendency, the trend in Canada to go lightweight, much more so than in Europe, where we are still building a lot traditionally with brick and blocks and so on. So in Canada, we are much more into lightweight, and that's a big opportunity for us to accelerate our carbon neutrality or sustainable approach in Canada.
Well, I could add on top of what Richard said. I think from when you look at kind of the energy that a building consumes, certainly we see some of those dynamics that Richard was saying in terms of retrofit market versus new construction market. So I would say there's more similarities on the new market. So certainly Canadian standards, Canadian codes driving for energy efficiency in new builds. And we're seeing the designs come out, and certainly we see the demand from customers to having very energy efficient buildings. I think in contrast, Europe has done quite a bit around the energy directive and in ensuring that you kind of maintain your energy efficiency, and that if you go to sell your building, you've shown steps you've taken to make your building more efficient. And some of that is maybe driven not just by policy, but also, as Richard mentioned, the demand for retrofit seems to be higher in Europe. At the same time, I think we can benefit from that because we still have an extremely large existing building stock in Canada, which can be retrofitted. And so I think, so there are similarities in the new builds, and what I would like to see is some more commonality in terms of what are we doing to ensure retrofits and repurposing of buildings have more pressure from a codes and standards and perhaps a government directive mandate to kind of raise the floor of what a minimal acceptable sort of efficiency level would be. So, buildings make up something like 40% of the world's CO2 emissions, and they have very long lives. So if we do nothing to them since they've been built, we have a big gap in terms of addressing this sustainability question. So similarities, I think for new builds, people are striving for the same kind of top in class efficiency. What I would like to see is more collaboration around what we do for retrofits and how we can improve that piece.
Thank you, Adrian. Oliver.
I think Europe has had a long history of green movement, of consciousness about environmental issues, to a point that I think we haven't had in North America. So having had regulation around higher energy performance in buildings, I think that's been a good first step. What we see in Canada, though, what's interesting is that we have a real interest in this sort of sector that we're in that is timber construction and moving buildings generally towards carbon neutrality, looking not just sort of operationally related emissions, but also embodied carbon emissions and life cycle performance. And as an example, the federal government in Canada has just issued a mandate that all federally funded buildings must be carbon neutral by 2025. So new construction, and that's a considerable challenge to the industry. And I think that's a very, very good move. And so we see also on the provincial levels increasingly a consciousness that sustainability and generally the question of ecology and economy they shouldn't be mutually exclusive, that they actually should work hand in hand and help to create new economies and add a lot of value to our forestry sector, for example. And so there's a significant, I think, movement that we see right now that's led to some quite remarkable innovation where, you know, in terms of like, we have one of the first high-rise timber buildings in Canada was built already 5 years ago. And so we see innovation in that. It's still in pockets and it's certainly not spread across the entire industry, but I think we can see sort of like a groundswell of consciousness and companies embracing these trends.
Thank you, Oliver. So, I mean, there's a question and comment in the chat around digging in a bit more in those opportunities for retrofits in terms of materials. Renovation happens and we, in Canada, throw things out. We're guilty of this. We do renovations ourselves. I'm sure we've bought some of the things you guys have made. I've seen in other countries, particularly countries in the South, that actually reuse material. Any comments just in terms of the comment around the non-sustainable materials like drywall? Where are the opportunities where we could do better in this sector?
So I can probably answer that question because drywall is a big part of our business. Drywall can be recycled infinitely. So when we talk about sustainability, drywall is typically a sustainable building material. If we take the example of our plant in Vancouver, which I think is one of the provinces that's the most advanced when it comes to sustainability in Canada. We have a recycled content of 29% last month in the plant. So recycled content of gypsum that was coming from deconstruction from the work sites in BC, where there is a filière that has been organized to collect the scrap from those work sites, recycle it, and reuse it into the production of new drywall components. So we can, and drywall is clearly a sustainable raw material, unlike many others that are used today, but drywall is clearly sustainable.
That's great to hear, because I know that when we take it apart, we're not gentle. And so there's no way we could reuse the drywall. I'm glad to hear it gets recycled.
No, you cannot reuse it as such when you dismount it or disinstall it. But if it's properly collected and recycled, you can reuse it in the production of new drywall. It's all about organizing the filière, and it strongly depends on the local regulations. It strongly depends whether you can landfill those products, deconstructed products, or not. So it's about the full ecosystem, not only manufacturing or installing. It's really the last part of the product life. Can we reuse it? Yes. Does the ecosystem locally allows for reuse of the product? Not necessarily all the time, but we're working on that.
Great.
If I may, I think that's where the responsibility comes back to the manufacturers a little bit. We would see similar in our industry, and I think it's 30% of landfill globally is construction waste. So that's obviously an astronomical figure. And it's about the quality of the products that we make and whether there's recycled content in them or whether the product as a whole can be recycled. Recently, in our head office in Ireland, we did a retrofit of our plant there, and we put on this integrated PV panel. So it's a new product for us, but that building was built with the very first Kingspan panels ever produced, and all of the panel that was removed was subsequently sold locally to local farmers and small businesses who sort of built a lot of their own industrial units out of it as well. So I think the quality of the materials that you use in the first place, I suppose the 3 R's when you're talking about reuse, reuse, or recycle, if you can reuse it in the first place, then you're on to a winner.
Yeah, for sure. So these are great examples. I mean, I appreciate the context setting around. We've got opportunities to push forward sustainable construction on both sides of the Atlantic. If I can ask you to think about some other examples around how can we continue to drive sustainability in the construction sector and have impact. Who'd like to go first? Go for it, Oliver.
I just wanted to add a point about the retrofit aspect as well. I think one is to really look at the entire life cycle of a building and consider them and design them really more holistically, so that, you know, one of the biggest problems that we have is that we actually demolish buildings that in many ways are actually perfectly fine. They may still be structurally sound, but they actually do not any longer meet the demographic needs of people living in cities. So we've taken an approach to really look at adaptability of buildings, for example, that you can convert, you can change the use over time, and you build that sort of flexibility into the buildings, that you don't have any structural walls that are in the way of other programs. And if we just look at what just happened over the last year and a half, all of a sudden we've all started to work from home. And so we have different demands on our spaces, and, you know, and sometimes things then don't fit anymore. So you need that flexibility and push the life cycle out from 40 years to 100 years. You need to deploy building science and everything that we can possibly do to avoid any kind of demolition in the first place. And then, you know, the simplified construction using systems built that when everything gets glued together, but rather that you can take a building apart again readily at the end of its life cycle and reuse it from there. And the materials that are used in there are then perfectly considered from an entire sort of embodied condition about toxins, about you know, any off-gassing, anything that's embodied in the construction overall. So I think that's really important. I think as an industry, we'll definitely go towards this direction to really look at this building from initiation to repurposing or reuse in other ways in the future. And maybe as a second part too, and with our building system, these large scale facade panels we made, we've also designed them so that you can actually, when you have buildings that don't perform well any longer from an energy perspective, you can take the old facades down that have poor windows and poor sealant and poor insulation, and you can reclad these buildings with these new facade panels and can get them basically up to high energy performance.
Right. Okay. So there's materials we can do, there's design we can do. In terms of, you know, some examples, are there other kinds of things that we can be doing?
All right. I think obviously, Carol, you know, from a technology standpoint, this is the business we're in, and, you know, particularly as we look for things like retrofits, what we do is we kind of, when we look at sustainability of building, we look at sort of two aspects. We look at passive energy efficiency and then active energy efficiency, and I think, you know, a lot of what we've talked about is all these advancements in material properties where we can really make the building envelope and the construction of the building more sustainable. We can also do that using digital technologies as well. So rather than, I think, you know, for maximum benefit, you have to do both, but particularly as we look at retrofitting, just the ability to better manage the energy in the building. So if you have sensors and information about how the building is being managed, you can drastically reduce energy costs. So we have a great example where we did a project in a historic building in the Midwest called the Fort Garry Hotel. So it was one of these old kind of traditional, you know, railway hotels, very historic. And just by implementing, you know, sensors and an automation system, they saw a reduction of around 20% of energy savings coming from that. And so these are sort of things which are fairly straightforward that can be implemented. They can be implemented wirelessly, so you don't have to also go through the damaging the sheetrock or the drywall to install the sensors, all the way up to very sophisticated and complex routines where we are now using artificial intelligence. You know, we've been going through COVID, so the dynamic of how a building is used nowadays is quite a bit different. You know, the days of having these full conference halls, and then, you know, how do you manage that? So being able to look and have software look and understand of how the building is being used and identify, hey, you know, if you have this area of the building which isn't being used to slow that down, and then tie that back with things like workspace management to try and fill up different floors or different areas of the building. So you focus your energy into the areas where we actually have people. So you keep the comfort up, yet reducing overall the energy consumption of the building. So so from an active energy side, there's certainly a lot of places that that technology can help buildings become more efficient.
I'd love to know if you have a solution for getting my teenagers to turn off the lights in their room too, please, Adrian.
Well, it's a short plug. We have something called Wiser Energy. You install it and it tells you what devices are popping on and off in your home. So it can identify you've left your oven on or which lights are going on, and also gives you a comparison with how your house is performing with other homes in the same general area, so you can get a sense of how sustainable you're being at your home. So the solutions are coming out every day, Carol.
Right. Okay. So the solutions are for large buildings, residential buildings, not just big spaces that not all of us have been in the last 20 months. Wonderful. Any other examples you want to share before I take us to the next point in the discussion?
Well, Adrian was mentioning that 40% of the emissions in the world are generated by buildings. The split is roughly 12% are coming from construction, and the rest is the usage of the building. So I think we've spoken a lot about the usage of the building. When it comes to the construction, I think there is a lot that can be done over there. That's the responsibility of the manufacturers like us, and our commitment to net zero carbon by 2050 and clear roadmap to reach that target across the world. And the other approach we can get also is to go to those light and sustainable solutions, moving from what we know is having a lot of embedded carbon in the solution to something that's lighter when it comes to the embedded carbon in the solutions we propose. So Oliver presented one, but we've got also many in SaintGobain that we push as light and sustainable solutions for the future.
Wonderful. So that makes me link to the next question. But before I go there, I'm just going to say thank you, Oliver, for answering the question in the chat. Please, all of the panelists, if you have a specific question directed to you, let us know if you want to speak up rather than answer it in the chat, and keep the questions coming. It's more interactive this way. So when you talk about you have materials, it makes me wonder, okay, so you're developing materials. Is that a price difference with what would be the incumbent materials? And that leads me to the question of sort of what kind of barriers exist to accelerate innovation and push sustainability in the construction sector? Any thoughts?
I can kick it off and we'll see what the rest of the team says. But you know, maybe one of the biggest two barriers that I see. One of the first barrier I would say is you can call it code adoption or harmonization of code. So we have building standards and codes in Europe. We have building standards and codes in Canada. We have building standards and codes in the US. So one, harmonizing those, and then the speed of adoption. You know, just a very simple electrical experience here is, you know, even if we look at things such as the efficiency of transformers, this is kind of like your Energy Star, but for commercial and industrial transformers. You know, the US adopted way back in 2016 a new energy standard for efficiencies, and Canada adopts it, you know, province by province, and we really didn't get through that until recently. So quite a significant delay in terms of adopting standards, and I'd really like to see Canada leading the way in kind of pushing for efficiencies and standards. So codes and standards, I think, is one. It'd be interesting to hear if they see similar challenges on the building material side. And then I think the second barrier that we see is proprietary technology. So we're a firm believer that if you're going to maintain a building over a large course of time, or there's different technologies, that you have a platform which is open and connectable, so that as technology is developed, it can be plugged in. So I think moving building technologies towards a more open platform that is more standardized across the industry, I think would certainly help from a active energy management standpoint, allow more building owners, more facility managers to move faster with technology adoption. So those are the two that I see from my perspective. And I'm very interested to see what the other panelists see.
Well, I think there is also a, I'm sorry.
No, vas-y.
I think there is also a disconnect in the value chain. Usually the ones who are owning the project at the beginning are not necessarily the ones who are going to live with the building during its lifetime. So they don't have necessarily the same interest. And I think a stronger normalization or incentive from the governments and the local regulators would help to raise the level of energy standards or energy efficiency standards in order to meet those objectives we've got in terms of carbon reduction. That's one. And then when you want to push innovation, and I think Oliver is probably facing the same kind of issue, Thomas as well, Adrian and Thomas, you need to deal with a lot of stakeholders, and they don't have necessarily the same objectives. You need to deal with architects, you need to deal with the main contractor, the project owner, then you need to deal with the subcontractors and the trades. And all of these different stakeholders are not necessarily aligning on the same objectives. So there is a lot of convincing work to be done to be able to push those innovations that are changing the way potentially we build buildings. And that takes time, and we don't have time.
Oliver, Tom, yep.
Yeah, so there's, I mean, just to reiterate, building code is definitely a major issue, I think, for all of us, to be able to push innovation forward. And what we've adopted is really not trying to wait for building code to be published, but trying to be proactive and work with the regulators to create the building code together. I think we should do that as an industry because we're the experts, and we can help the regulators to understand what's possible. We can educate them on that side when you deploy technology. Second one is really a move towards productization, that we don't just build one-off buildings, but rather that we can come up with systems and fully integrated product solutions, because that's the only way that you can really change the paradigm of the performance level of buildings. Procurement is a major issue. Procurement is completely stuck in the ruts of the status quo and really almost prohibits the rollout of innovation, because with productization and an approach or an industrialized approach, you really have to tender buildings at the front end. While with the way how procurement works right now is that you have to get the design done and then you want to find the lowest bidder, meaning by that time it's too late to do it right. That brings me to the next point, the whole issue of digitization, that we all work with common digital platforms, that we can share information, share data, and then to the last point, that we can also learn as an industry, instead of fighting over contracts and change orders, that we actually learn to collaborate and connect. And I think that's sort of the key thing really at the end, is all, as it just was mentioned, is all about collaboration to drive innovation forward.
Thanks, Oliver. Tom, do you have any? Yeah.
I do, and I'd agree with everything that has been said. And what we would find is that a lot of our blue chip customers are very much on the same sustainability agenda as ourselves. But a lot of the others aren't, and that's where it's a little bit of a race to the bottom in terms of value work. It's the sustainability piece gets priced away from it. And I suppose we're based in Canada, we supply throughout North America, and when you see the US withdrawing from the Paris climate change agreement last year, the whole thought process behind sustainability took a big step backwards, I think, in that regard. So that's certainly a challenge. And yeah, I had another point, but it'll come back to me.
Okay, well, I have a question that's related to this. So think about it, Tom, and come back to us. There is a question around, which to me is not so much I don't see it as a barrier, but it is a challenge, because as you were just saying, Tom, around, things have taken a bit of a backseat in terms of sustainability in the last 20 months, in certain cases. We do see housing costs as something that's going through the roof in Canada right now, some inflation, and this is going to have an impact on sustainability, I think. I'd be interested in your view, because I know that, people, as you said earlier, Tom, are interested in the aesthetics and the beauty, right? And so I know builders where I live who've said, yeah, they want that granite countertop rather than the extra efficiency or the triple pane windows, right? That's where they'll put their money. So if we're going to be more sustainable, housing costs going up and down, is that a barrier? What do we do about it?
Yeah, maybe I can make a first couple comments, Carol, on that one. So I think, if we kind of segregate kind of commercial industrial construction from residential construction, there's some differences, but I think, and Tom mentioned, yes, I think we took a hit, but large companies that are making these major investments do have a sustainability goal, and they are kind of looking towards improving the sustainability of some of these large buildings. So I think they're, and as a real estate investor or as a facility manager, they know that the value of that real estate will increase over time if they make the sustainability investment now. So they're looking on a broader time horizon. But I think when we pull it back into residential, and we're talking more like you and I and people buying homes and our own personal choice, from my perspective, we haven't gotten to this. What is the operating cost of our home? And we've been very focused on the first cost, and that's the barrier. At least from an electrical standpoint, and I'll let the team talk from a buildings material standpoint, but there's more and more technology coming out to help you. And I mentioned that one device, but there's more and more control over homes as well in terms of controlling the energy in the home. And we're seeing more and more implementation of renewable into homes, what actually lowers the cost to operate the home. But if I look at the costing or the pricing, certainly residential home prices in Canada have accelerated much faster than the price of at least the materials that I supply into the market space. So I believe that there's room in there for the consumer not to have to pay a premium, or not a significant premium, to get a more efficient home. So that's my perspective from what I see.
I can only support Adrian's comments on the inflation that we see. That's not necessarily linked to the cost of raw materials, and that there is room clearly for improvements without necessarily increasing the price to the final owner. I think also what we need to do, and Adrian pointed it out, it's to speak about the total cost of ownership of a building during its whole life. I mean, the money I invest today upfront in making my envelope more energy efficient, my automation of my building more energy efficient, is something that I will where I will see a payback in the coming years on my energy bills every month. So we need to educate probably homeowners and invite them, guide them to consider the total cost of ownership of their home. And that's what we try to do.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I'm just reading a piece here, but the International Energy Agency say that buildings account for 36% of all final global energy demand. So that's running costs. And of that, space heating, cooling, and water heating are estimated to account for nearly 60% of that. So small incremental changes for us, the performance of the building envelope have a massive effect on the running costs of the building. And if you take Canada, for example, we operate on both extremes of the spectrum in terms of temperature. So it's not uncommon to have it feels like -30 outside, and it's equally not uncommon 6 months later to have +30. So a 60-degree temperature swing is astronomical. And when you then have to account for both heating and cooling costs of a home or industrial commercial building, I don't have the figures to hand, but I'd argue that those costs are more significant in Canada than they would be in Europe.
Yeah, for sure. Unless you're smart like Oliver and you're on the West Coast.
Yes.
Doesn't get so cold. Yeah. I think one thing that's really important when we think about affordability is to consider that right now, when we look at better performance from an environmental perspective, for example, it seemingly means buildings have to get more complicated, more complex to meet those standards. And we sort of pulled away from this and sort of said, well, if we allow ourselves to create a new platform and really rethink how we're going to deliver projects, then we can sort of breed it into the DNA of that technology platform to think about the performance of a building from the get-go, so that really energy savings and affordability and faster construction and lower carbon footprint and all these things should actually work hand in hand and should not complexify buildings unnecessarily. So part is also to simplify construction into lesser components, lesser trades, more resolved issues. And that requires really this investment into creating platforms that are really highly scalable and adaptable, but maintain this consistency across, so that from the same platform you can deliver to a multitude of customer needs and site conditions and so forth, but you can carry 80 to 90% of componentry and engineering cost, and this is already all built in. So you don't have to re-engineer building always from the start. If it's, it seems as an industry we don't learn enough lessons to bring them back into what we do to make the future really more consistent.
Right. So all of these different pieces of the discussion make me think about something that feels like a bit of an elephant in the room, and that is different cultures. So a lot of you have lived on both sides of the Atlantic. I have as well. And I know the regulations and the directives in Europe help to push, some advancements faster than Canada probably, but those regulations are made by lawmakers who are elected to do so. So I'm just sort of, do you feel within your work that sometimes culture is part of the difference, what you're seeing on both sides of the Atlantic? And I realize that that is not a simple and easy question to answer, but it always comes up every time I hear the discussion and your answers. Anyone? It's okay if you tell me that.
I will leave it to my Canadian colleagues to answer, because being French, I don't want to give lessons to anyone. We've got a bad fame as French people around the world. So,
well, I can give a small sort of operational example. So when the Planet Passionate piece that I mentioned was rolled out, we have our zero waste to landfill target, and all of our European facilities have found it, I'm not going to say easy, but have found a support system that exists to facilitate that zero waste to landfill. So you can ring a recycling company, they'll come in, they'll put the infrastructure in place, they'll give you all your receptacles, they'll do your signage, and they'll collect the garbage outside once a week, and it's almost done. Whereas nothing like that exists here. So we've a real uphill struggle just in my plant alone, trying to achieve that target, whereas it was sort of ticked off the box with an outsourcing exercise in Europe.
I 100% agree and support Tom's comment there. So we have operations in different provinces in Canada, and we're moving all of our facilities towards zero waste facilities, and we find it, depending on the jurisdiction, easier or harder, and the complexity of not being able to roll something out for Canada that we can apply equally across all our facilities is actually quite difficult. And there, I think there's a perception change, and there's probably maybe some engagement from the federal government to harmonize. I'm using the word harmonize a lot, but I think if we want to simplify trade and allow people to adopt and move forward, I think the more it's the same across Canada, I think the faster it can happen. But I heard a term, so this is for industrial recycling and waste reduction, but I also heard a term the other day, which was Canadians do a lot of wish cycling. So that they're not quite sure, but they wish they could recycle it, so they put it into the blue bin. And I think somehow we have to, I think it's evidence of there's a will for Canadians to do more recycling, but there's a complexity to it. And there's a desire for more of a circular economy, or of a recycling economy to be put into place. So I think anyone listening to this, I think the more we can share that voice across Canada, I think it would be great. But 100% agree with what Thomas said and what they're going through. We see the exact same in our facilities.
Oliver, any comment?
The cultural discussion is a difficult one, right? Because we do not want to stereotype anything. And when I think about Europe, it just has so many pockets of wonderful culture and inventiveness and so forth. But we do, like, I think we sort of exploit that. Like, you know, every year we go with a group from the Canadian Wood Council and travel through parts of Europe and visit manufacturers and talk to people that do very, very great things, and we learn from them. So I think one thing is you can really learn from the differences, what's being done in other parts of the world. And, you know, it's interesting too, how sometimes regulation in Europe seems to sort of inhibit a little bit of innovation sometimes, because things are regulated very well, but also quite to a degree of depth that don't make things necessarily so easy. And we have a little bit more freedom because our building codes are more performance-based. And so when things get a foothold here, in North America, and that's just not just Canada, but also across, you know, the US, momentum can develop in a way faster, which then is something that we can experiment a little bit more and bring that knowledge back to some of the European partners that we're working with. And we're using, you know, parts of European supply chain and very much, I think this issue of culture is to, as I said, is to exploit those differences and integrate them with each other.
Thank you, gentlemen, for entertaining my curveball. It is a slightly unfair question. There is a population density reality between Europe and Canada. And so where I live in Calgary, there are certain things there is no business case to recycle, right? So I wish cycle them too, Adrian, I'll use that one. But yes, you're right, Oliver, around how can we learn from each other to help further the innovation. A thread of the theme throughout this in terms of how do we work together. So that's where I'm going to go next is, you know, you are global companies. How can EU and Canadian companies work together to support net zero emission agendas? How do we push that? How do we work with governments? What, you know, is it tools? Is it legal frameworks? What are your thoughts on how we do more together?
This is probably a great forum in the first place. I think the EU Chamber in Canada, by having businesses on the board and being able to sort of have these discussions, it makes us all aware of that we're sort of all facing similar struggles, and that we have a certain amount of power as lobbyists to take some of what's in Europe and hopefully get federal legislation around sustainability in Canada and throughout North America. So without being specific, I think this is a really good first step.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks, Tom, and I 100% agree. I think you know, there's actually you know to that point, one of the advantages that we have between the European Union and Canada. You talked about culture previously, Carol, and I hadn't spent any time working in Europe, but I have spent some time working in the US. And I remember one European company placing their engineering headquarters in Canada. And I remember the head of engineering telling me they did that because they saw Canada as a bridge between Europe and the US, and that they couldn't really have the same sort of conversations and connections. So I think there is really an opportunity for Canada to take leadership around this from a North American standpoint and get ahead of the curve. And there are some similarities. You know, if we look at the Scandinavian countries in terms of you know, climate and environmental conditions of temperature and things like that. And then, you know, through the rest of Europe, you know, some strong ties with businesses that are doing business on both. And I think all of us here, European headquartered businesses that actually have manufacturing in Canada as well. So there is certainly a duality of what is happening in Europe and what's happening in Canada. And I think, you know, really honing in on what some of the core topics are, the barriers, that the question you asked us earlier, for us to attack those with a common voice I think can help. And I think really if Canada can start to lead a little bit more, then we get the flow going the other direction to Europe as well. And there's a lot of great ingenuity in Canada that can also be shared and help the world, not just Canada, not just Europe. So certainly these forums and getting a common voice, I think is necessary for us to make sure that the governments on both sides of the ocean understand which will help trade and what will help trade drive for more sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely. Hichard, Oliver.
Harmonization in Canada, to me, is key. Right now, you've got many provinces trying to reinvent their own way to move forward. So I think harmonization is clearly a way. I think that harmonization should come from the policymakers. It has to be driven by Canada, just like it's been driven in Europe by the European Union, and then backed up by the local governments or the national governments. If we have a look at the emissions per capita in the world, it's just amazing. Canada is 18 tons roughly per capita per year of CO2 emission. You compare that with Germany, which is around 8 or 9. France is 5. So someone is going to say, okay, the climate in France is not the same. Okay, so let's go to Sweden. It's 5 or around that. So there is really a big urgency to move the needle when it comes to the objectives in terms of energy efficiency of the buildings. Another cultural difference I would see myself, I spent a big part of my life in Paris. I know a lot of people who don't drive cars in Paris. I don't know any in Toronto, so maybe I'm my friends are not necessarily representative of the Ontario population, but still, I think that's one of the cultural difference. When it comes to the positive ones for Canada, well, I think you are talking about wish cycling. I think you are doing a much better job in Toronto when it comes to recycle. Recycling the garbage, domestic garbage, is way more advanced than it is in Paris today. So kudos to Toronto people and Ontario people when it comes to that. But yes, I think lawmakers have a big role to play, and we building materials manufacturers, we are all in to support that.
Wonderful. Oliver?
Yeah, I would hope that there would be a way to harmonize some key aspects in the regulation, not entire building codes, but just a simple example. We'd like to use certain mass timber products that we could bring in from Europe or from Austria or from Finland, and sometimes we can't because we have now a regulation here that requires us to use certain glue, right? And so that's just unnecessary. To put things like this in a regulation. It's a way of controlling markets in a way. And so if we could, or we'd like to use high performance windows that we could import on certain projects. And again, they're not tested to the same standards, and it makes it difficult to use them here. So if we would find a way between the countries to say, what are the sort of key barriers right now to bring products in and facilitate either harmonization there or provide budgets for testing or market access, right? I think it's actually good. Like some people may think it's not good to bring a European window to Canada because that undermines the Canadian window makers, but it actually enables us to provide better solutions overall. And this is the problems we're facing, they're global problems, and we need global solutions.
Oh yeah, and I think that's the very essence of both this organization and this chamber, and what we're talking about is that there's lots of opportunities. There's going to be lots of opportunities for Canadian solution providers and manufacturers, and global and European solution and product manufacturers. And by putting up barriers, we're just impeding progress, right? And so I find that really interesting, that if you can get into the details around, the standardization of the materials, what can we do there? Can we learn from, the regulations that are performance-based and try to standardize in Canada? Those are specific things that we can all talk about, bring to, have collaboration between governments to try and advance the conversation. There's there's some interesting technologies as well. There's a question in the chat that I'm not sure that I understand, but someone asked about starting with new high technologies instead of innovating of the old ones. And I don't know what high technologies are, but there's the regulatory piece and then there's the technology and solution piece, right? So how do we together work on some of the solution pieces as well? And I'm not sure if someone can answer that question.
I mean, I would be curious. Go ahead, Olivier. Oliver, sorry.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly, but in a way, that's I think what we're advocating is to use technology that's available to us from artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, and all these kind of things to really, when you take them, you're not just looking at the old technologies and saying, how can I make it incrementally better? But rather the question is, what could I do if I had these technologies available, and reconceive those sort of building platforms and building products?
I saw in your slides, Oliver, you had mentioned digital twin. So perhaps something like that, maybe the question was referring to that, but it's sort of like, it can be anything, but it can be like the Apple Watch of your building. You get to see all of the key performance indicators of your building. You build a pre-construction, typically you can, by taking all your PIM and BIM files, you create basically an assembly that gives you a working, breathing model of your building in terms of your energy efficiency, depending on the occupancy. I think tied in with a lot of what Adrian uses in that regard. And it's fascinating when you see a fully functional digital twin. It's just sort of like the Mission Impossible piece from years ago.
But we do it in every other industry, right? We do it in the aerospace industry, in the automotive industry, in developing, the electronics, and the iPhone you work around. Nothing gets manufactured, nothing gets built unless it's fully understood, fully engineered, and prototyped and worked out, and then you make it, right? But in our industry, we operate on the idea of design intent, and then we let a builder figure it out, and he comes up with some more or less okay interpretation of some drawings, right? And a lot of information gets lost. So we're all about integrating the information, verifying the information, and using advanced technologies to make it possible, so that you know what the carbon footprint is, you know what the cost is, right? You can verify everything. Because buildings at the end of the day, they're geometry and physics times culture, right? And that's the something, if you can resolve that puzzle through these technologies, then you can really make advancements.
But Oliver, isn't it about BIM? BIM is existing. What's missing right now is the link between BIM and many of the stakeholders we see in the market. And I think we need to work on that to improve the future. I don't think there is going to be any magic resolution to our problem. I think there will be some strong innovations coming in, and Oliver may be very successful in the future with his solutions. There are many other players that are going to come up with innovations, but there are so many buildings to be built in the next 30, 50 years that I think we need all of the goodwill of all of the stakeholders right now to align on their target. And for us right now in Saint-Gobain, we've got a clear vision, and our clear vision is: one, we decarbonize our footprint; two, we maximize our impact on the environment, pushing as much as we can the solutions we are proposing, which are good solutions, light, sustainable, good solutions for the environment. They are not maybe as innovative as Oliver is pushing, but there are very innovative solutions to help solving that sustainability issue. And I think we need to just all align on that target. All of the stakeholders, all of the building manufacturers, all of the building material manufacturers, all of the main contractors, architects mostly are aligned on that. It's just a question of making sure we're all aligned, and the best way to align us is probably lawmaking policies.
I think just to add what Richard mentioned there, I also want to kind of comment on Tom. So if I can hit 2 points at the same time, I'd appreciate it. But you brought up the comment of BIM, and I think getting more and more people to develop BIM models that they can put into the software. There are software platforms out there which do BIM. There's also advanced.
You have to explain BIM for those of us.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so building information management. So it's
Perfect,
creating like
you.
basically little digital models, and then you can put these digital models together. And we often think of it as 3D models. So do we get the different pieces to fit together and understand the weights and the dimensions and things like that? But we're now starting within that digital twin to not just think about the physical construction, but and the 3D construction, but to go forward into there's a lot that also then tie that into cost. So you can do your project cost makeup. So then they just start tacking on D. So 3D to 4D, including cost, 5D, including time and project management. So you can make trade-offs between materials and costs and time and how do you optimize. And I think Oliver probably has a great optimization there in what I saw in terms of optimizing time and cost and simplicity. But now BIM models also need to include things related to carbon. So you can do what we call 6D modeling and understand what is the carbon impact of this. And there are some sophisticated software out there that even go down to when you're selecting contractors, the locations that they'll be coming in. And so the impact of transportation and bringing the materials in, what does that mean in terms of your carbon cost of building? So I think there's a good starting point with building modules and the digital twin, but it can be expanded further and really help us optimize. And to the question that was put earlier, that can help mitigate any cost. So if you can do it more efficiently, if you can do it with less waste, you can do it faster, you start to offset the cost so that you can get a sustainable building without or with little premium for the sustainability. And then we've talked a lot about, what policymakers can do to kind of help Canada move forward quickly. And I think that's absolutely necessary. But I did also hear a common theme among everyone, and Richard touched on it, and Tom touched on it earlier, and I know at Schneider, is how we're working with our suppliers as well. So, just as we say consumers vote with their dollars, I think as corporations, we vote with our dollars. And are we doing enough to work with our suppliers? I think Tom mentioned you have a big goal of 50% reduction for your supply chain, which is quite aggressive in your market space. I know, Richard, you mentioned some big initiatives there as well. So I think companies can also, vote with their dollars as well and put the pressure on their suppliers to do things to be more sustainable and help in that way as well. So I think we can do a push-pull approach where we get the government kind of pushing some policy changes, and we can pull our suppliers along as well to kind of help move this industry.
So if I can sum up what I'm hearing, thank you so much for bringing up the supply chain, because I was thinking to your points, Kishal, there's a value chain, right? When you're talking about aligning the stakeholders, it's not just you, the manufacturers, working with your suppliers. It's also you, the manufacturers, working with, and correct me, please, because this is me piecing it together, working with the developers, the builders, the architects in there. And you're saying a lot of those are aligned, maybe not all, but they're working with the customers. Right. And you're all impacted by the government. So it's sort of like all the way along the value chain of these structures that we're in every day have to be on the same page. Government, buyers, architects, builders, developers, manufacturers, suppliers. Am I missing anyone?
You are missing, if we think about the full life of the product, we are missing also all those who are going to deal with recycling or landfilling when it's allowed, and that's something that we need to tackle as well. Because if we want to build a sustainable ecosystem, we need to limit the ability to landfill deconstruction materials.
Correct. Yep.
And that's not true across Canada in all provinces. It depends on the provinces you are working in.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So I'm actually going to turn to Oliver, because Oliver has a question for all of you. Oliver, I'm happy to play back what we discussed, but I know that you wanted to ask this question, and I thought it was quite appropriate.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate that. But we're a very small company, and you're all representing very large, very experienced companies. So what I'm interested in is, in establishing sustainable construction in your businesses, where do you think the industry will be in 5 to 10 years? And maybe follow up on this is, many say the industry is really incapable of innovating, but we need to get to carbon zero or net zero. What is changing, or what needs to change?
I can. Oh, good. I can start. Or if I think further out, I think there's a couple things that I would say. We talked about digital twinning. I think digital twinning is certainly where the future is going, and that's going to help connect the process end to end. The other thing I see, and that I expect to, it's kind of here today, but I expect to accelerate, is just the adaptive energy consumption and the rise of what we call the prosumer. So proactive consumers, where there's a bi-directional flow of energy to the building and from the building. So I saw in your video there in the beginning that you had some solar panels on the top. Renewables, integrating renewables into buildings is becoming a requirement to meet certain standards. So certainly we're going to have buildings which were traditionally consuming energy that have now the possibility to be hyper efficient, and in certain cases, and depending on what's happening in the environment, to produce energy as well. And so, if we look at some of what's transpired over time in this shared economy of, things like Uber and Airbnb, if you look 10 years out, I could foresee where buildings and there's a sharing of energy back and forth. It's extremely complex right now with the regulatory framework around energy, but people need resiliency. So climate change is also creating weather events that have impacts, whether it's heat or fires or floods. And so people want more resiliency of their energy. And if you're going to build an energy efficiency building and you have renewables, there's opportunity to share that with someone that needs it, and then for them to share back when you need the energy. So I think, maybe, I don't know if that's 5 years or 10 years, but I certainly see that as something that we'll see more and more of the future as renewables get integrated, as microgrids get integrated, and as people start having more control over the energy in their buildings. So that's what I would say, Oliver.
I think we got a clear strategy and roadmap for the next 5 to 10 years. It's, as I mentioned before, going light and sustainable. So lighter solutions and more sustainable solution in terms of performance for our customers and stakeholders. In the meantime, we are working a lot on making sure that we reduce the impact and the footprint of our operations. We are committed to the net zero carbon by 2050, and there is a clear roadmap country by country when it comes to CO2 reductions. And that's valid for Canada as well. We are working on many projects across Canada. And I think probably where we will see a big difference is in the acceleration on everything that has to do with off-site construction, prefab. We are working on that, and Oliver, you are in the midst of that trend in the market, and probably as well a lot of digital influence or impact on the way we manage the work sites. That's something where we are very active as SaintGobain right now, reflecting on how we can influence the way things are built in order to reduce on-site scrap, because even if we see that off-site manufacturing is going to grow, it's not going to replace from one day to another all of the other old traditional ways of building. So how can we improve the pre-existing ways of building that are going to keep a significant share in the building processes in the future? So that's our commitment for the next few years.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it is the industry incapable of innovation, and I don't think it is, not at all in the slightest. And a lot of the barriers are just our imagination. So I fully agree with Adrian's point on the prosumer and bringing energy back into the grid. But we may be looking at, and it's probably a little bit further than 10 years down the road, that we see buildings that are only getting planning permission to be constructed in a certain orientation so that the PV on that roof is the most efficient possible. And then in terms of the building cost and the cost of running that building, could you even see buildings that are positive consumers of energy, or that they're consistently supplying back to the grid? And even on the life cycle of buildings, just there's potential, I suppose. Are we planning for, when we're manufacturing our products and when we're installing them, are we planning for 50 years down the road when it needs a retrofit? And if so, how can we build that incentive into the building as well? So over the course of the life cycle of the building, we want to be there in 50 years time to make sure that you have the next step and that we're taking that product off the building and reusing it back in our product again. And some of it's a bit further out than 5 or 10 years, but it would seem, you know, I think Kingspan are doing very similar things that Richard mentioned in SaintGobain. And yeah, I think I'd be lying if each of us don't have particular departments that are just bashing their heads together every day trying to figure out the next greatest and best thing that we can deliver to help achieve all of this.
Yeah, so a lot of effort going into it with a lot of optimism. There's lots of good opportunity. Thank you all. I see a couple of comments in the chat. I'm not sure if you want to comment on it. You know, Europe has a carbon price. Canada has a carbon price. There's a comment around, you know, to the effect that that's going to be a motivator, especially as the price goes up, really. So there are things that we need from our policymakers to standardize our regulations, but as our carbon prices go up, I think all sectors and consumers and all of the stakeholders in the value chain that we touched on, are going to pay attention to that price of carbon, and it's going to incent some different decisions, some new innovations, some different ways of doing things. My bystander opinion. I don't work in the construction sector like you do. Any comments?
Well, certainly, you know, we see it in real estate that the price of carbon and the anticipation of the price of carbon, I think in Canada right now it's around $40 a ton, and it has the potential to go to 170, which is hugely significant. And so if you're a real estate developer and you're building and you're thinking about a 50-year time cycle and you're not thinking about the potential risk of carbon pricing in the future, then so that's certainly driving a thought process in terms of development, particularly on commercial. And I think as people become more aware and you know, we are seeing more residential developments being smart and green and sustainable, and so we're seeing that demand come as well. So I certainly think that whether there's a price of carbon effect on the consumer directly or indirectly, certainly in the projects we're involved in, we're seeing sustainability and that long-term potential impact of carbon pricing making an economic reason for people to choose the more sustainable solutions.
So Adrian was mentioning the carbon price in Canada. You said 40. It varies a lot from one province to the other. To just show how serious we are in SaintGobain when it comes to that specific issue, all of the capex investments we push around the world, SaintGobain has set an internal carbon tax level at 130 Canadian dollars. Just to
level the
get
playing.
be serious about the impact of the investments we are making, and to integrate the fact that we don't make those investments for today. We make those investments for the next 10, 15, 20 years. So considering the impact on a longer time frame. So all of the investments that we're pushing today in Canada are considering in their payback calculation and prioritization that internal Saint-Gobain tax rate of 130 Canadian dollars per ton.
Fascinating. Yeah, great thing that you can do, right, internally to be, to be looking forward, because that's where it's going to go. Yeah, absolutely. Any final comments on that? We had one other question I wanted to make sure we address for one of our audience members.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think the carbon pricing is super important so that we have a level playing field, right? And the second one, I would hope that we come to a point where right now, when we talk to long-term asset managers, rental housing operators, they already can see the light because for them, it's just the long-term economics that matter. But when you talk to developers who want to sell condominiums, they're like, well, we just sell them and then we're out, right? And so is the market willing to pay more? And that is this early adopter issue that you will face. I think that the whole electric car thing right now is very successful because there are incentives. And I think government should provide incentives to those buyers to, when they make that decision, that maybe they don't have to pay property taxes for 2 years or 5 years, or something where you simply have an advantage. And so now you can confidently make that choice. And we need those incentive tools in the industry. They're virtually non-existent.
Yeah.
And that's a very big difference culturally between Canada, North America, and Europe. In Europe, countries are very big on incentive for retrofit or even when you're building. So that's a good point.
Yeah. Tom, any final thoughts?
I just have to agree with what the guy said, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So an interesting question around LEED program. I don't know that we have a lot of time to dig in. I think that anything that helps to move the needle is great, but I don't know LEED like you guys. Is it something that's helping?
I would say yes. If you take the two latest examples of big buildings developed in Saint-Gobain for Saint-Gobain, and I'm referring to our brand new headquarters in Paris, 160 meters, all made of glass, featuring more than 80 of our solutions inside the building. It's LEED Platinum, and that's a new building. It was built between 2016 and 2020. We entered the building beginning of last year. That's new, but if you go to a retrofit, and we were mentioning retrofit just a few minutes ago, our headquarters in North America, in Malvern, close to Philadelphia, is the retrofit of a very old building, and it's LEED Platinum as well. So we work on not only the energy efficiency and the impact on the environment, we work also on the comfort and well-being of the people living in those buildings, working in those buildings, when it comes to the acoustic performance, the quality of indoor air, light impact, and so on and so on, so that our employees get a good experience working with us. So LEED is clearly, in my opinion, something that helps. Probably not the only one. There are many different certifications around the world. You've got high environmental efficiency qualification in France that is considering the full life cycle of the building from construction to deconstruction. That's another way to do that, and maybe we could learn in Canada from that experience in France as well. But there are many ways to certify the buildings.
Right.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I mean, there's probably a dozen or so different building certifications. LEED is probably the predominant one in North America, and I think some projects outside North America. There's Green Globes. There's BREEAM is fairly popular in Europe, so we see a lot of BREEAM ratings. So I think all of those things are kind of, the badge of honor, maybe, that sets kind of, without the government regulation, sets kind of a higher standard that you can put there. LEED does have some benefits because it also encourages people getting certified, and I think that to be a LEED certified promotes education and understanding of the technologies that are out there. So I think that's a good thing about LEED. They do have retrofit certifications, although I would say ideally I would like to see LEED more as a continuous thing that you have to continually manage. Things like ISO 14001 require you to have an energy program and to move forward. So I think, you know, it's this continuous evolvement or continuous operation, particularly in the construction where we're living in these buildings for many years, that it shouldn't, I guess, shouldn't be just a one-time stamp and then you can brag about it. I think we have to keep up. And so so I think LEED is great. And I guess what I would say is I would like to see more of a kind of a continuing need to recertify to maintain the certification rather than, hey, we built this in 2014, it's LEED Platinum, but now we build it in 2021, we have more aggressive targets. So, but certainly those sort of things help with consistency across the industry.
Great.
I think for people that want it, it's excellent. But for the people that don't, it doesn't do a huge amount. So I suppose if you make a commitment to LEED, you then always want to be one step better, which is good for everyone. Nobody wants to go and get a LEED bronze anymore. They want the gold or the platinum. So in that respect, it's great. But if you're not interested in it, you're not interested in it. So yeah, it's not going to convert somebody, but it's good if you're interested in it, I find.
Yeah.
But you know, as we were mentioning before, there's not going to be any magic recipe. I think everything is helping to meet that target. Certification is one, and I think we should not be negative about that. I think we should see that as something positive that's helping us to improve. So we need all of the support we can find. So.
Yeah, we need all the things.
Great.
So we're almost at time. Oliver, any last words on that? And then I'll pass it back to Delphine.
Yeah, I just echo what everybody said. I think it's really important that we have some standards that we can reference to and that we can use a standard. We are looking very much at the zero carbon building standards right now from the Canadian Green Building Council, for example, and Passive standards. In addition to LEED, and some of our clients want LEED because it's known, right? In the industry, it has certain advantages, certain disadvantages. We can spend a whole day talking about which standard is the best, but it's definitely good to have them so that we can compare apples to apples.
Wonderful. Well, merci and thank you all, gentlemen. This has been a wonderful experience for me to learn from you, and I hope that the audience has enjoyed it as well. Merci, Delphine, for the opportunity, and back to you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Yeah, I will. The good thing is that I think there's more work for UCAN to do in all sectors. So I will have a lot on my plate after this event. But yeah, thank you very much to the speakers. Thank you very much, Caroline, for moderating this great conversation. I think there's very much information that UCAN can take and again work on. So to all our participants, you can check our website to see the outcome of this event and obviously other events. I will not keep everybody longer. Thank you very much, everyone, for connecting today. Have a great day or have a great afternoon or morning, depending on where you are calling from. And if you would like to participate in other UCAN's event, just feel free to connect on our website, ucan.com, and see our next events. Thank you very much, everyone, and see you next time. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Bye.